Welcome everyone to this Faculty Roundtable sponsored by HJ International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership. We're delighted you're joining this evening's program from wherever you are across the world. I think you're in for a treat, a spiritual and intellectual enrichment. Our topic, which been prepared by Dr. Andrew Wilson, is called Imagining Biblical Narratives Through the Hermeneutic of the Principle of Creation. And I'm advised by Dr. Wilson, he'll explain to all of us what hermeneutic means if you're not familiar with that term. Dr. Andrew Wilson's approach to scriptural studies is theological, ecumenical. His Old Testament courses explore what the scriptures mean and have meant to diverse communities of faith, the people of ancient Israel, for whom they were written, the early Christians who read them in the light of Christ, and today's believers, Jews, Christians of all stripes, and unificationists. He challenges students to become interpreters of the Bible who can infuse it with new life for today's believers and seekers of truth. I think that's what he has in store for us this evening. Dr. Wilson is a prolific scholar whose books and papers cover diverse topics ranging from religion and peace to character education. Hailing from a Jewish background, he writes and speaks on the problems of Jewish-Christian relations and the Middle East conflict. Wilson's efforts on behalf of interreligious harmony led him to write World Scripture, a comparative anthology of sacred texts, which has become a standard work of interfaith scholarship and a resource for interfaith worship. He also teaches in the area of feminist theology, especially on relating to God as Heavenly Mother, and in defense of Mrs. Moon, Dr. Hak Jahan's leadership. A committed unificationist, Wilson gives regular courses on divine principles, such as divine principle in depth. In the spring, I want to add that he will be teaching Hebrew Bible. I'm encouraging you to consider enrolling if you're not already enrolled. That's the spring semester Hebrew Bible and world scripture and world peace, the relationship between religion and building a world of peace. He contributed his interfaith scholarship to writing World Scripture and the Teachings of Sun Myung Moon, which has been adopted by the church, particularly Father Moon, as one of the 8 official textbooks. Dr. Wilson joined HJI's faculty in 1985. He's a great and brilliant colleague and professor of scriptural studies here at HJI, and we look forward to hearing his presentation. And I welcome now Dr. Wilson. Please take the floor, and we look forward to listening.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. The title of my presentation is Reimagining Biblical Narratives by the Hermeneutic of the Principle of Creation. So let me just explain a little bit what is a hermeneutics. Hermeneutics means principle of interpretation. It situates a text within a framework of meaning, because a biblical text can mean different things to different folks. The same Old Testament means one thing to Jews and something else to Christians and something else to historians. So based on one's hermeneutic, the biblical different things jump out of the biblical text as being central, and other things recede into the background. Many Christians have the hermeneutic that Jesus is the Savior, and therefore they interpret the cross as a victory. Unificationists tend to use the hermeneutic of the principles of restoration to understand the cross, and therefore they see the cross as a setback. So your hermeneutic determines how you look at a text, and furthermore, how it informs present-day action. Do we praise the cross, or do we experience God's pain of the cross? Same biblical text, but different hermeneutic. So for another example of hermeneutics would be Martin Luther. He came along at the Reformation time and promoted the idea of sola fide, faith alone. Faith in Jesus saves, not human works, taking his cue from St. Paul. In his view of the Bible, certain books like the book of James that value works are lesser scriptures than the book of Romans or the book of Galatians. He also opposed monasticism because he understood that penance, celibacy, and all such conditions are worthless. They're only works, they don't save you. You can only be saved through the grace brought through Christ. So monks and nuns should marry, and Luther himself practiced what he preached. He left the monastic life. He started off as an Augustinian monk, and he himself married Katharina von Bora, a former nun. Likewise, Luther was very unhappy with indulgences, or you could say church campaigns if you want to broaden it out. They do not save you to be involved in a campaign. They are simply human inventions to raise money for the papacy or for whatever church you belong to. So he had that hermeneutic, and that influenced him, obviously, in a different direction than the Catholic Church would. And as a unificationist, we have been living basically through most of our church life based on restoration as the hermeneutic. So restoration has been very powerful in the life of unificationists for explaining the meaning of biblical narratives, like Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, the Israelites 40 years in the wilderness as fulfilling a 40-day condition. It sets all of these events within God's great work of providential history aimed at laying the foundation for the Messiah. As such, restoration has great explanatory power for understanding biblical texts, and it prepares the reader to participate in laying the foundation for the Messiah, him or herself. True Father's lifelong stance was informed by this hermeneutic. He constantly made conditions to separate Satan. He identified Cain figures and subjugated, i.e. won them over, such as Gorbachev and Kim Il-sung. His mission was to restore the fundamental mistakes at the beginning of history through applying the hermeneutic of restoration. And this laid the foundation for success of his own messianic mission. So, as a unificationist, we have been practicing restoration and rooting that in the biblical narratives. So we make indemnity conditions to separate Satan based upon the number 40, taking after, for instance, Jesus' 40-day fast. We view competing institutions and nations through the lens of Cain and Abel. We want to identify one as an Abel side, the other as Cain's side, and talk about Abel subjugating Cain. And privilege religion as Abel and denigrating secular viewpoints as Cain. We try to elucidate the providential meaning of current events, and this seemed to work quite well during the Father's lifetime, when the world was a bipolar world, basically shaped by the conflict between democracy, i.e. Abel, and communism, i.e. Cain. However, in the new reality of Chun Il-guk, things have changed. And it's with the advent of True Mother and some of her teachings, we can see how this shift is taking place. So first of all, Satan no longer exists because Lucifer surrendered in 1999 and is now on God's side. So we human beings can no longer blame Satan for our difficulties. We have to take responsibility ourselves to solve our own problems and by providing substantial solutions. But based on a restorational hermeneutic, we many people still focus on spiritual conditions to separate Satan. And this has been the pillar of unification practice, and in many cases it still is. Another issue is if Satan no longer exists, and Satan is not making a claim on the human lineage, then we still see evil in the world, but we can look at other causes as being more important, more salient. For instance, unresolved collective sin in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the black-white situation in the United States, unresolved inherited sin, such as family dysfunction, lack of growth, because the fall caused people to stop growing into beyond the growth stage, ending up in bullying and the acting out of teenage rivalries, even by politicians and grown people who have not grown up spiritually. So we still need restoration, but it's restoration in a larger sense of healing, apology, making things right. It's not as simple as going 180 degrees opposite the sin of the fall. There are other options available. So, having removed Satan, we can build God's world of peace based upon the principle of creation. We can represent God's parental heart as the key to solving problems. Nations can cooperate to build the world of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. UPF has been on the forefront of promoting this idea. Religion and science can cooperate to solve problems like environmental degradation. And we can embrace all nations in a world that is no longer bipolar, that is no longer neatly divided between the communist world and the democratic world. So operating from the principle of creation creates a broader framework for action to solve world problems. A second new reality in this era of Chanilguk is the emergence of Heavenly Mother. And Holy Mother Han is her first substantial embodiment. She expresses the hope for all her children to also embody Heavenly Mother, and indeed all humankind she regards as if her own children. That's Mother's heart. And from her, that heart can expand to women everywhere, and women can attain the dignity of having the voice of God in them, instead of taking the voice of God as coming from the men. And therefore, the principle of creation, which requires some kind of balance between the male and the female, can become realizable. So, Mother's heart is different from Father's heart. Heavenly Father is marching on the providence to defeat Satan and taking sacrifices along the way. But Mother's heart wants nothing more than for all her children to be happy. And Heavenly Mother suffers to see war in which her children are killed or turned into killers. And she trusts her children will grow, even if it takes a long time, into an adulthood where they can have a different attitude about life and put aside childish rivalries. So through growth and adult conversations, there can be a resolution of problems. And of course, this is the work of diplomacy. This is the work of peace building that the Hyojung International School is very much involved with, because we are all ultimately one family. Okay, so Holy Mother Han teaches, quote, all the religions that have emerged have been dominated by men, yet our Creator's principle of creation is based on a pair system. Therefore, the culmination of fallen human history cannot be achieved by men alone. In other words, she's saying that religions, and hence the Bible and all the narratives in the Bible, are patriarchal and discount the value of women. I think that's pretty obvious if you just look at the stories in the Bible. Men are the main characters. Women have play only a supporting role. Therefore, the principles of restoration that our true father discovered based on his study of the Bible, which is a partial truth, cannot realize the ideal. In the ideal, the principle of creation features gender balance. So we can see all around us this shift taking place. It's not just Holy Mother Han proclaiming these things in the unification movement. It is the wider society is moving this direction. We see the rising visibility and power of women. We see the decline of traditional religions. There was just a poll that came out just today, talking about something like a 17% decline in the last decade of religiosity in the United States. And the fastest growing religion in the West are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. These are people who just don't believe in any religion. They might be spiritual, but they don't like organized religion. They leave religion. They process the hurts that they felt from the strictures of religion, but many of them find God in other ways. For instance, near-death experiences, which is what our former professor, Dr. Winings, is involved in now. History is moving beyond the bipolar world of Cain and Abel into the multipolar world where the world conflicts are too messy to be just analyzed simply as Cain and Abel. For instance, the conflict in the Ukraine, the rise of China, or America's new approach to diplomacy under President Trump. So, with all these signs of the times, it's no wonder that the message of part 2 of the Black Book that looks at history based upon the restorational hermeneutic is losing its persuasive power. And this is a danger for our church, or a challenge for our church that we need to face. So let's take a look at the principle of creation as a hermeneutic. That's my main point here. In other words, although it is true that the unification worldview based on the hermeneutic of restoration made sense of the Bible and made sense of history and made sense of current events at least up to the time of Father's life, when the communist versus democracy paradigm was primary, today all those foundations are shaking. And at the same time, True Mother is putting restoration aside and proclaiming the principle of creation. So she is already striving to make the principle of creation the governing principle for unification practice. Now, can we then go back and look at scripture from this new hermeneutical viewpoint of the principle of creation? That's what the rest of this lecture is about. Okay, so if you need a proof text, you don't believe what I'm saying, I can give you some proof text. Father said on January 15th, 2009, in this area, we will no longer be captive to the principles of restoration through indemnity. And Mother stated in the Chambu Moran, the truth must be viewed from the perspective of the principles of creation. And I say that includes biblical truth. So let's see. Yeah. Throughout biblical history, shackled to restoration, the work of God's champions was heavy. And every step of the way was difficult. And every gain in the providence was a struggle. God's people had constantly to deal with Satan. And God did not have the resources to move the world into the principle of creation. And this applied especially to women who were not valued and were not given leave to value themselves. So what about today? Since we are in a new age, when women have value and when God has more resources for living by the principle of creation, can we revision history as it would have advanced had Heavenly Mother been present and had abundant resources available to help Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Rachel, Leah, Jacob, Moses, and so on? If our thinking is no longer tied to an outdated hermeneutic, we may be able to see a path to a brighter future more clearly instead of simply using the old paradigms and continuing the old ways. So in the old paradigm, everything was categorized as Cain and Abel, and these positions were required to deal with Satan's accusation. Cain's hostility to Abel was baked into fallen history. It placed Abel in the position to be hated and to have to deal with Cain's jealousy. Thus, we have the miserable history of chosen peoples who constantly got attacked by the world, even up to the Holocaust. Abel had, on his side, had to subjugate Cain by winning the heart of Cain. And this was very, very difficult, as we know. And it required Abel to sacrifice again and again and again. But now, what do we see in 2025? Shinchul Nim and Shinhung Nim, the two sons of Yojanim, are no longer Cain and Abel. They stood together at the opening of the Chanil Sanctum on April 13th, 2025, to receive the inheritance of God's love and blessing. In the principle of creation, these sons of Yojanim and Yonanim are simply elder and younger brothers, and they are joined in the hearts of filial love and sibling love. I actually believe this was a dream of Father who envisioned a council of true children where all the true children were worked together, united at heart. So this is the new practice of the principle of creation. And we can generalize this to all family societies and nations, putting aside the paradigms of restoration and instead view them from the principle of creation. And to support that, we can look backward and revisit biblical history and see how the principle of creation would work, and then recognize its implications for today. So look at Adam's family. Imagine Adam's family where the fall has been forgiven and the family is prospered under the love of God, where Eve is no longer accused and has been healing inside to become confident, capable as a good mother. And Adam and Eve's home would be full of love, enlivened by their daughters, providing elements of femininity. There would not be any issue of Cain being closer to Satan and Abel closer to God, because there would be no Satan. Therefore, the sons and daughters would be easily able to discuss everything together. And when Cain and Abel would stand before God, God would accept them both and bless them both. It would no longer be an issue of Cain offering being rejected. So the so-called, if we then extend that to how the world is now, these so-called Cain and Abel views of life that the principle talks about would not be tainted by resentment, and religion and science would be complementary, supporting one another instead of being seen as enemies. Capitalism and socialism would be seen as within the normal range of social structures and would be evaluated by their results for people's happiness and economic well-being. Instead of hostility, there would be rational discussion of good governance. And instead of either or, societies would take the best features of both. Without the hostility of Cain and Abel, this all becomes possible. Let's see. So we can analyze history and society in this way if we kick the habit of seeing everything from the hermeneutic of restoration, and a new range of possibilities opens up for solving real problems. How about Abraham? Let's revisit Abraham's family for peace in the Middle East. In the providence of restoration in Abraham's day, God was constrained by a patriarchal society, which functioned by the laws of primogeniture. There had to be one central male heir, and there was competition among the sons as to who would be the central male heir. Cain and Abel, Ishmael or Isaac, Esau or Jacob. A lot of drama in those early families at the time of Abraham. Must it be that way today? Still, the nations of the Middle East are fighting for the right of the firstborn. It's about time they went beyond that. So the principles of restoration justified the favoritism of Abel over Cain because it was a necessary measure to separate Satan. For Jacob to win over Esau would restore Cain and Abel. For Abraham to favor Isaac and expel Ishmael, the same. God needed to lay a foundation for the Messiah in one chosen people. They would be God's people, distinct from the world. Yet this favoritism became the root of the Jewish-Arab conflict in Israel-Palestine, which is now causing so much heartache and suffering in the world today. So there was also the voice of women was constrained in the patriarchal culture of the day, where especially being subjected to the indignity of polygamy, like Jacob's 4 wives. Entangled in the patriarchal social structure, they fought each other for supremacy. Each woman wanted to be the mother of the inheritor. Sarah and Hagar fought. Who would be the inheritor of Abraham's estate, Ishmael or Isaac? And Rachel and Leah fought over that too. You could say that from the viewpoint of Heavenly Mother, it was a horrific existence for these women. But that was the world they lived in. Once the requirements of restoration are gone, there are better options. If we analyze Abraham's family from the principle of creation, now that Satan no longer exists or has been removed, there's no more need for favoritism. And women, if they are free from the poison of polygamy and patriarchy, can find joy in Heavenly Mother, each and every one of them. Then it becomes possible to apply the 4 great realms of heart to Abraham's family. And one way to do that has been suggested to me is co-parenting. So Abraham had children by 3 wives, Sarah, Hagar, and Keturah. What if Sarah, Hagar, and Keturah would co-parent all of Abraham's children? Sarah can love Ishmael, Hagar can love Isaac, the wives can love each other as sisters, not as rivals, and they can love each other, they can love their husbands' children. So then Abraham can love his sons Isaac and Ishmael without discrimination because there'd be no rivalry among the mothers. And there are plenty of modern blended families that strive to do just that. It's not so unusual in today's world to have co-parenting. If that kind of co-parenting solution was applied to Abraham's family, even retroactively, based on the culture that we have now and the hard-won gains of modern life, we could dissolve the root of the Arab-Jewish conflict from where it started. Okay, so we can go beyond now we have to deal with the chosen people issue, which is another thing that was required by restoration. Chosen people set up to lay the foundation for the Messiah. Israel, the chosen people for Jesus, the only begotten Son, and Korea, the chosen people for the only begotten daughter. But ultimately, in Chanilguk, all nations of the world can be heavenly nations. And in the principle of creation, there's no discrimination among peoples, even though nations and peoples may have had certain providential roles to reach that point. Once we reach that point, the blessing can be spread widely, as Mother did when she gave the blessing in Niger, in Africa, to the Muslim world and declared heavenly Africa. So there is the whole chosen people concept becomes something to appreciate, that chosen people have gone through such a course to lay foundations, but ultimately in our current practice, we could be much more universal. if we don't hold on to that sense of superiority that many, as a Jew, I feel in my people, a tremendous sense of superiority, and it's a real problem. Okay, continuing, I'm almost done. Let's go to Moses' course. So Moses climbed Mount Sinai alone and received the 10 Commandments. And yet, in the divine principle, it says that the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments represent Adam and Eve. So, from the standpoint of the principle of creation, since God works through both male and female, Moses should have fought for his wife Zipporah to have permission from God to climb Mount Sinai along with him. There she too would have received some kind of 10 instructions. I'm not going to call them commandments because to me commandments is a very masculine thing, but maybe there would have been 10 women's instructions alongside the 10 masculine commandments. Abraham could have, Moses could have done that. Even if God initially didn't say anything about that, Moses could have argued for it, just as Abraham argued with God to do what was right by Sodom and Gomorrah. There's plenty of precedent in Judaism from people arguing with God for what they understand to be best, right, and most just. If that had happened, if Zipporah's stature in Judaism was one of a co-lawgiver alongside of Moses, how wonderful a foundation that would be for the only begotten son and the only begotten daughter to stand together as lawgivers in our time, or even in Jesus' time, because the Jews, on the model of Moses and Zipporah, would have had an expectation for the only begotten daughter in their time, in Jesus' day, and history could have unfolded much differently. So, what's this? Duty of care for God. Okay, we all as unificationists believe that we should take care of God. We all believe that God is our parent, and our parent needs our help as filial children. And we know that Father God grieves over the fall and humankind's fallen state, and Mother God suffers for the misery that she sees in her children's life. We know that from the principle that God agonized over the painful course that he had to put his champions through in order to walk the path of restoration to recover from the fall. Now that we have the possibility to live by the principle of creation, which is the path to lasting joy, isn't it our duty to take that path and relieve God of suffering? If we continue our old habits of thinking and doing based on restoration, dwelling in the mentality of patriarchal religion, we only prolong God's pain, which continues to this day. So, hermeneutics, to conclude my lecture, is talking about meaning. What is the meaning of the Bible? What is the interpretive principle by which we give meaning to biblical text? That's hermeneutics. We who are the interpreters of the Bible are the owners of that meaning. It's not the Bible that determines the meaning. It's us and how we understand the Bible to mean this or that. That's our hermeneutics. So we are the ones who decide what hermeneutic we shall use to translate history to life in the present day. That principle of interpretation, that hermeneutic, not the history itself, is what determines our practice. And therefore, we are the owners of history because we are the ones who ascribe meaning to it. And finding the hermeneutic that we believe or that God leads us to understand is best for understanding history and how we should operate based on history and for the future is our own responsibility. And so I'll end with a quote from the divine principle. We who are alive today should cultivate a humble heart and make the utmost effort to receive divine inspiration through prayer. We should not be strongly attached to conventional concepts, but rather should direct ourselves to be receptive to the Spirit in order that we may find the new truth, which can guide us to the providence of the new age. I think we are at such a time right now where we have to reevaluate some of the conventional concepts that we've been operating on and be guided by the Spirit. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation today.
Wonderful, wonderful, Dr. Wilson. Very stimulating presentation. So thank you for putting this together, giving us a taste of what it's like to take one of your courses. So it's stimulated many ideas. I've asked our audience to put their questions in the chat column. I may elect to call on one or two in the audience if we don't have so many. But just while some questions are being formed, Dr. Wilson, I guess, one thing, a couple of thoughts came to mind is, one might say, is the reliance on principle of creation, let's say, overly idealistic when we're dealing with, say, the in-between of the kingdom of Chanuguk and the legacy of the fallen world that's both there in history and within ourselves, and maybe there's some transition from the old era of the restoration to the principle of creation era. How do we address radical violence? Even in political races, there's issues about should we have so many police? Should we have more people that are more devoted to restorative justice and finding more loving ways to nurture those who are incarcerated, for example, or people when they're young? But these systems will take lots of time to really achieve their ends, and lots of obstacles. So it seems like we're living simultaneously in the world of the ideal and the world of realpolitik at the same time.
Well, I think I explained in one of the slides that the problems that we have coming out of inherited sin, collective sin, hurt, resentment, and hurt from the past, like, for instance, the colonial experience, which is a big part of the Palestinian issue, and lack of growth. Lack of growth means a lot of people need therapy, and a lot of people need time to process hurt. That doesn't mean we stop having police. That doesn't mean we leave ourselves open to more violence. It's just that we can think about things in a broader way in terms of looking for realistic solutions. And I believe that our peace building program at HJI probably is looking at many of these approaches, which are not, strictly speaking, approaches based upon the doctrine of the principle. We have a lot of wisdom that is accumulating about ways to deal with conflict, building trust, helping people, having, what are they called, these places where the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, for example, things like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
They're not idealistic. They're part of, it's recognizing that it's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight.
Good. Okay, we're getting some very good questions coming in. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. Magnus Larson, I'll start off with. If we and I quote him in the chat, if we say True Father's hermeneutics was only restoration, and today's is closer to the ideal, being, I think, the principle of creation approach, we open the door, Magnus suggests, possibly, for anyone to baptize their preferences as the new truth. And he says that's exactly how some second gen, he believes, dismisses the divine principle as merely a wilderness product to justify, therefore, their own secular lifestyles.
I don't think the principle of creation calls for a secular lifestyle, because the four position foundation and the three blessings are all centered on God. So to say that the principle of creation is a justification for a secular lifestyle, it's not. We haven't been teaching because we've been focusing on restoration and on the ethics of the Black Book, part 2 of the Black Book, as a religious system. We haven't put so much emphasis or resources into religious education for dealing with life from the standpoint of the principle of creation. We have our work cut out for us to really develop a principle of creation centered religious education program for our young people that is going to help them clearly see this is not secularism. This is not giving into the secular world. This is coming to something much higher. And
it may mean that precisely what you're doing is what is needed, because in some ways, the new model of principle creation needs to be articulated with examples and that better, which you're doing. Jim Edgerly is asking, if we accept the idea that, quote, Satan has surrendered or Satan doesn't exist, why does that have any real significance? After all, evil is deeply rooted. Is there any evidence that the amount of evil in the world is diminishing? If it is not diminished, isn't separation from evil still a necessary part of individual, family, social, and national life?
Separation from evil. Well, that's a very broad and kind of nebulous concept, separation from evil. We all know what Satan is from the divine principle. We all know specifically that Satan works through lineage and we need the blessing and all of that. We all know that separation from evil, there's lots of ways that evil operates. And dealing with evil means dealing with the evil within our own hearts. We need to look at ourselves first. How are we manifesting evil? It means looking at our relationships. How are our relationships separating us from God or bringing us closer to God? So it becomes a more nuanced sort of thing, rather than simply we do these conditions and that's going to solve a problem.
One thing came to me again was kind of this idea of headwing, in a way that because some of what I hear when I think of it more sociopolitically or whatever is kind of how liberals and conservatives have understood the world, some systemic evil versus individual responsibility. And
let me just say, I don't want to put Father and Mother's hermeneutic as opposing each other. Father needed to do what he had to do at his stage in the providence. His mission in the providence was to establish the foundation for the holy wedding and the blessing and to bring Satan to submission. And Father did that. And now Father fulfilled his mission. He was victorious in fulfilling his mission, I believe. And now Mother is building the next stage. The building of the Father built the foundation. Mother is building the house on top of the foundation. So it is incorrect to sort of pit these two against each other. That's what I'm. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Shizoni Ngoma is stimulated by your discussion of Martin Luther and particularly his disagreement with Pope Leo X regarding indulgences. Yeah. She's asking you, do you see a correlation with some of our own practices that seem to be related to fundraising. Any thoughts?
There are a lot of issues in the unification movement structurally, and Mother recognizes those issues. And just bringing a lot of money into one centralized place, where it could be used corruptly, that's the sort of thing that the Germans at the time of Martin Luther saw going on in the Vatican with St. Peter's, the building project for St. Peter's. And so I think it's something that we have to watch out for. We are not unique. We are not different from other religious institutions. We are subject to the same laws of sociology and human behavior as anybody else. So I think we need to be careful. We need to watch ourselves, and we need to. I personally believe that tithing to my local church is where I want to focus my money on, because I want to see us build strong local communities. If we're going to survive in America, we need thriving local churches. So that's my personal preference. In that sense, I'm a little bit like a Lutheran, because the Pope was funneling all this money from the German, pious German Catholics into this Vatican project, and it was weakening or impoverishing the church structures in Germany. So I can see some parallels there.
Okay. All right. Stephen Jarris, can you unmute and ask your question? I like your question. I think it's a good one. Are you able to unmute? If not, I'll read it.
Why don't you read it? I don't remember exactly what I said.
Okay. Does the concept of original sin exist in this principle of creation hermeneutics? And then what is the appropriate explanation of the blessing and its purpose, which now should be redefined in a non-restoration way? And then the need to redefine the purpose of the 3-day ceremony.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into all that, except to say that the blessing is a celebration of a couple's unity with God, and placing God at the center of their lives. And it is also engrafting the couple into the lineage of true parents.
Yeah.
So rather than separating from Satan's lineage, it is engrafting into true parents' lineage. So the emphasis is more there. But this is a complicated issue. And I would say that in favor of moving away from restoration and towards the principle of creation, that we need to pay a lot more attention to education and support for blessed couples. That just getting the numbers of blessed couples in order to become a Chunbo couple is really not accomplishing all that much. What is needed is for continual education and support for these couples to truly come to know God and true parents, and come to live a principled life. Unless we do that, the blessing just becomes another numbers game.
Now, linking into that, I'm going to ask Sally Sayre. Sally, are you there? Do you want to ask your question, or shall I read it? From Camp.
Hi. Yeah, I can. Yeah, this was wonderful, Andrew. I really, really appreciate this, because I've sort of been on a search to renew my relationship with God. And I'm going to a camp meeting on Saturday with the people who are running our Shahakwa family camp. I haven't taught there since 2019. Or no, 2020. I did a kind of COVID era camp where I just made up games that each family could play on their own in their own tent. We went back to families in tents. But anyway, my question is, I've been using my master's in religious ed by teaching at camp, and I'm concerned about how we educate our children. How do we share our faith with them, especially as things have changed in terms of, the original way I used to teach at camp was I would do principle of creation, the fall of man, restoration, and then end with the true parents are here, kind of. Then gradually I began to do more focus on the 3 blessings. original intent of the three blessings, and that's kind of what I did in 2020. But do we need a new sort of script or curriculum
I'm
for our
glad you're
children?
working on it, I'm glad you're working on it, Sally. But that's all I can say. I'm glad you're working on it. I think the three blessings is a great place to start. Young people should have that concept drilled into their heads, that our life course should involve the three great blessings, and that our first blessing is to become a mature person with self-control and a good relationship with God. And that's where a young person should be at. And they can find that in their parents. They can find God in their parents. They can build themselves as people of good character. And
Right.
I think that's where it should all be at. I don't know. It's a decision of the camp to what extent you want to emphasize messianic thinking in your teaching of young people.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that messianic thinking is all that relevant anymore, because those young people are going to be alive long after two parents have passed into the other side.
Right.
So I think we need to teach the way of life that is going to help them.
One thing I used to teach in public school, I was a public school teacher, and I used to teach my students, 7th grade, 8th graders, the restoration of the four fallen natures without calling it that and without mentioning God. I would just
Good.
say, just say you needed to understand your value as a human being. You didn't give yourself life. It was something, and then anyway, mastering yourself before you try to manage and master other people. And you ultimately find your value in serving others and that a lot of it comes from the things that were developed for the Providence in Russia, for the international education stuff.
I was
Sally,
a part of that.
Sally,
I
what
was
you
a part
got?
of that
Character ed.
organization too. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
very
So,
good.
I
Very good.
want to move on to Bruce Clark. Thank you, Sally. Wonderful. Bruce, do you want to make your intervention verbally?
Sure, I'd love to.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the question this is bringing up for me a lot of things I've been reading about and thinking about. Father in his last years, emphasized the sphere and the round ball. And this seems to me for us in teaching about the principle to emphasize less the positions in the four position foundation and more the spherical motion and the three objects purpose, all the things that deal with relationship between those roles rather than the roles, right? I mean,
Right.
and this even suggests more equity between those roles, because the ball can roll in any direction. And it seems to me that is a way to elevate our children's role in so that they, I don't know, are just more nurtured as well as not forgotten. And also the male-female component, as well as mind-body. I mean, in an ideal world, the mind and body, are a lot more equitable, rather than one being Cain and one being Abel. The mind and body we need to listen to our bodies and our minds in order to be mature. Your comment.
Agree.
Okay.
I totally agree. In
Okay.
fact, I wrote a post on Facebook about the importance of your body and listening to your body, and that drew a lot of attention. So yeah, the four position foundation for individual perfection includes the body as one of the positions. Therefore, your body has a relationship with God. It's not just underneath the mind. It's in diagonal relation, give and take arrows between your body and God. And of course, that happens in sex, but it also should happen in terms of being aware of the spiritual energies in your body. So this is all very good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, thank you, Reverend Clark. Dr. Hendricks has some thoughts about foundation of faith and substance. Dr. Hendricks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, it's just a side point, but I think I'm realizing that some basic principles that we associate with restoration, rightly so, but also are rooted in the principle of creation, foundation of faith, time periods. The growing period is positive foundation of faith, foundation of substance, as Bruce said, relationships, building good relationships. You make a foundation of substance of husband and wife, foundation of substance of parents and children. When you make unity, something substantial happens. So I really appreciate your talk. This is great. You're breaking down just to educate about hermeneutics is so important. My hermeneutic happens to be the family. We really need to think about make a hermeneutical shift. One final talk, just a moment. Men and women equally have good and evil sides. This is my viewpoint. Responding to your patriarchy, and tending to say, oh, women were all good kind of thing. Men and women have equally good and evil sides. Evil history is the product of evil men and women. Good history is the product of good men and women. Patriarchy is sustained by evil women. For example, represented by the whore of Babylon, with whom the kings of the earth fornicated and the merchants of the earth grew rich by indulging in her luxuries. Okay, thank you very much.
Whenever you see evil in the world, behind that evil is hurt and pain. Even someone like Hitler, when you get right down to it, why did he become such a monster? Because in his childhood, in his early life, he experienced a lot of hurt and rejection. And he was trying to compensate for that by becoming all powerful. So, you have to see evil also as not an absolute thing, not something that you objectify and say this woman is evil or this man is evil. All of us are God's children, and we've all been hurt, and we've all been victimized by patriarchy. We've all been victimized by the fall. We've all been victimized by our parents' lack of love for us, or their conflict in their marriage. We have a lot of things in our background that have created problems and issues that can cause people to become, quote, evil, unquote. I don't like the word evil when applied to people. I'd say people are all God's children, and some of them do bad things.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hendricks. Mr. Edgerly, I see you have another question. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay. Thank you so much. This is such an important discussion we're having. We're really listening very carefully, Dr. Wilson. At least I am. So, when you're talking to this Mrs. Sayer, you were talking about a new way of approaching education, using a new hermeneutic. And in that, it's very hard right now for me to teach about who Reverend Mrs. Moon are. I'm doing some writing in that topic right now. So how would you, if you were to be really creative and kind of principle of creation oriented, how would you include the role and the purpose of true parents in an educational curriculum?
That's a really, really tough question, because we're no longer in the age when messiahs have a lot of purchase. And I think that it may be better to simply speak of them as people who God used to bring incredible truth that is bringing change to our thinking and therefore change to our world. For instance, True Mother, bringing up the concept that God is Heavenly Parent, that's a revolutionary concept. Just to get that out there into the public and to get people to think about God as mother as well as father has incredible implications. Father, he fought all of his life to establish a basis for goodness in the world, following in the footsteps of Jesus. because he came to complete Jesus' mission. There are very few people that love Jesus as much as Father, maybe nobody. So, there's a lot of things that can be said, and we have resources in our church. Who was it that wrote a thing about the greatness of Father, and he had like 7 or 8 categories. I forget which of the Korean elders wrote that. But yeah, we can do that. But that's not the central topic of my talk today. So I don't think I want to say anything more.
From Nigeria, Reverend George Ogurie makes a point that's echoed by Bruna Allen. And as George writes it, does the concept of co-parenting not validate polygamy, which has no place in the principle of creation?
Co-parenting means you take care of the children of your first marriage, as well as the children of your second marriage. If you're a man who has been divorced and then you marry again, you are still responsible for the children, to be the parent of the children of your first wife, of your ex-wife. And I suppose it would apply to a woman too in the same way. So co-parenting means that the exes somehow get along. It doesn't mean that they're still sleeping with the man. No, but they are having a continual. You have an eternal responsibility as a parent to the child that you bring into the world, whether you're the father or the mother. You have an eternal responsibility to that child. And if you're in a blended family, you have to share that responsibility with the other parent. And
Mr.
it's not
Hahn.
polygamy the way it happens in America, anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Ogurie. Good to hear from you, and Bruna. Mr. Hans Moyer, who's responsible for the International Media Association for Peace under UPF here in North America. Hans, you want to ask your question? Unmute yourself. There you are. You're muted.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Yes, you may have seen our IMAP program last month, hosted by Ray Lapalkin. And in that program, both Larry Moffat and Peter Zurr from Austria shared a really deep insights into the current problem with social media, especially. And the bottom line was that each one of us, is responsible for the ethical standards of media today. And Larry cited the movie E.T., where the boys are having a conversation at the dinner table, and the the expression, very crude and undignified expression, was shared to the national audience of children that was watching this particular movie, and nobody said anything about it. So we're starting with IMAP a campaign. Media ethics starts with me, to align with the Peace Starts With Me alliance that the Family Fed is building. So really, the content of what we can create and what we can share through media. How could your topic, Dr. Wilson? How can we shape that into an effective dialogue that we can have with the global society?
Thank you, Hans.
I think performing arts is incredibly important. I'm not so interested in talk media or political media, but I am very interested in music and movies and videos and culture, because I think that we could do a tremendous amount to put forth our ideas in the mass media through through media. We don't. Who in the Unification Church is a YouTube influencer? I don't know anybody. Yet the entire political sphere, especially on the right, has been moved so effectively by YouTube influencers. We
Yeah.
need talented people in our movement to get involved in media. That's for sure. Because it is the media and the culture that will shape our world. And people are going to pick up on music. People are going to pick up on celebrities. So we should become those people. And then we should craft a message that can, even in the smallest way, move the needle towards goodness.
We're running near our time. I do want to give a chance to Colm O'Connor to ask your question. I know it's try to make it as concise as possible in the interest of time, Colm. And if you're not, are you still with us? And if not, I'll go now to Robert Selly to give a concise statement of your question. And I think this will be our last question. Are you there?
You can read it, Dr. Walsh. I don't mind. Please go ahead.
Okay. What do you think about the notion of the realization of true love as the central hermeneutic for examining the Bible? I think this is the essence. The Bible is bristling with stories about true love. Everything I've looked at from this perspective brims with the quest for true love. So I think he's saying, would this be an accurate or adequate way to think about the core hermeneutic principle of
That's right.
viewing?
I think that's good. Go for it.
Well, maybe.
Go for it. We have many ways of explaining the principle of creation, and love is at the center of the principle. The whole purpose of the principle is to realize love. But what is true love? You know, the important thing is that love, God has to be somehow involved in true love. It doesn't have to be the Judeo-Christian God. It can be the conscience, God working through the conscience. It can be Vishnu, you know, if you're a Hindu. The stories of Krishna and the gopis and all that. So there's lots of material to talk about true love in every culture. And true love has to be able to be strong enough to be more than just a good feeling. There has to be a real commitment there. And our stories of true love should be stories that include virtue. Because growth and growth to maturity is a very important part of the principle of creation. And simply secular true love is usually at the teenage level, falling in love and so on. So we have to do better than that.
Well, excellent presentation and really excellent questions that allowed Dr. Wilson to further develop his thought and I think leave us wanting more. I think this is a time we have to draw to a close. And I remind everyone that in the spring semester, Dr. Wilson will be teaching Hebrew Bible, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more from him if you want to enroll in that course. He'll also teach a course on world scripture, an anthology of sacred texts, and its application to building a world of lasting peace. So you get a taste of Dr. Wilson here tonight, and maybe take his course in the spring. So let's give our appreciation to Dr. Wilson, and let's maybe put everyone out there on screen so we can just take a minute to greet each other. Thank you, Dr. Andrew Wilson. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for attending. And if you really have some question that you want to go into with me more deeply, please email me.
Excellent.
Wilson@hji.edu. And I've tried to answer your, to engage you in discussion.
Very good. And I should mention, Dean Boyd, we have a research day a week from today. So we'll be sending out notices about that. And we also have Dr. Mickler featured in a program the following week about true parents chronology in the United States, North America, that I think you'll find very interesting. So have a great night or morning wherever you are. Reverend Ogurie, get some rest there in Nigeria at 3 a.m. And thank you everyone for joining.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
Sure.
Thank you,
George,
Dr.
good to see
Wilson.
you again.
Thank
It's
you,
been a
Dr.
while.
Wilson.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
Carol,
Thank you. It's
Yes, thank
excellent.
you, Dr.
Whitney, good to
Wilson.
see you.
You're really challenging us, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
But I wanted